Caterpillars by E.F. Benson. I saw a month or two ago in an Italian newspaper that the Villa Cascana in which I had once stayed in had been pulled down, and that a manufactory of some sort was in the process of being put in place. There's therefore no longer any reason for me from refraining from writing about the things in which I myself saw, or imagined that I saw, in a certain room and on a certain landing of the villa in question. Nor from mentioning the circumstances which followed, really, which may or may not, according to the opinions of you, dear reader, follow some light on what I could or could not have seen. The Villa Cascana was in all ways but one a perfectly delightful house. Yet, if it were standing now, nothing in the world, and I use that phrase quite literally, would induce me to set foot in it again, for I believe it to have been haunted by a very terrible and practical force. You see, most ghosts, when all is said and done, do not do so much as harm. They may perhaps terrify, but the person whom they visit usually gets over their visitation. They may, on the other hand, be entirely friendly or benevolent, but the appearance in the Villa Cascana was not benevolent. And they had made their visit in any slightly different manner, I do not suppose I should have gotten over it any more than Arthur Ingalls did. The house stood on an ilex-clad hill not far from the Italian Riviera, looking over at the iridescent blues of that enchanted sea, while behind it rose the pale green chestnut woods that climbed from the hillside till they gave place to the pines that, black in contrast with them, crowned the slopes. All around in the garden, in the luxurious mid-spring bloom, was the fragrance and the scent of magnolias and rose, yet borne on to the freshness of the winds of the sea, followed by, like a stream, the cool and vaulted rooms. On the ground floor, a broad pillared loggia ran through the three sides of the house, the top of which formed a balcony for certain rooms on the first floor. The main staircase, broad and grey marble steps, led up to the hall to the landing outside these rooms, which were 3 in number, I believe, namely 2 big sitting rooms and a bedroom arranged on the suite. The latter was unoccupied. The sitting rooms were in use, and from the main staircase was continued to the second floor, where one situated in certain bedrooms, one of which I was occupied, while from the other side, the first floor landing of some half-dozen steps led to another suite of rooms, where, at the time I am speaking of, Arthur Ingalls, the artist, had his bedroom and studio. Thus the landing outside my bedroom at the top of the house commanded both the landing of the first floor and also the steps that led into Ingalls' room. Jim Stanley and his wife, finally, who I was a guest of, occupied rooms in another wing of the house, where they were also servants' quarters. I arrived just in time for lunch on a brilliant noon of mid-May. The garden was shouting with color and fragrance, and none the less delighted at my broiling walk up to from the Mariana. Should have been coming from the reverberating heat and blaze of the day into the marble coolness of the villa. Only, the reader has my bear of words for this, and nothing more. The moment I set foot in that house, I felt that something was wrong. This feeling, I may say, was quite vague, though very strong. And I remember that when I saw the letters waiting for me on the table in the hall, that I felt a certain explanation was here. I was convinced that there had been bad news of some sort of me. Yet, when I opened them and I found no such explanation for my premonition, my correspondence all reeked of prosperity. Yet this clear miscarriage of presentation did not dissuade my uneasiness. In that cool, fragrant house, there was something wrong. I am at no pains to mention this, because to the general view it may explain that though, as a rule, I'm so excellent a sleeper that the extinction of my light on getting into bed is apparently contemporaneous with the being called by the following morning. I slept very badly on my first night in the Villa Cascana. It may also explain the fact that when I did sleep, if I was indeed asleep at all, and that I thought what I saw, I dreamed in a very vivid and original manner. Original, that is to say, in a sense that something that, as far as I knew, had never previously entered into my consciousness. Usurped it then, but since, in addition to this evil premonition, certain words and events occurring during the rest of the day might have suggested something that I thought happened that night. It will be to relate to them. After lunch, then, I went around the house with Mrs. Stanley, and during our tour she referred it is true, to the unoccupied room on the first floor, which opened out of the room where she had lunched. "We left the room unoccupied," she said, "because Jim and I have never had a charming bedroom and dressing room, as you saw, in this wing, and if we were to use it ourselves, we shall have to turn the dining room into a dressing room, and have our meals downstairs. As it is, however, we have our little flat there. Arthur Ingalls has his little flat in the other passenger, and I remembered that you once said that the higher up you were in the house, the better you were pleased, so that's why I put you at the top of the house instead of giving you that room." It is true that a doubt, vague as my uneasy premonition, crossed my mind at this. I didn't see why Mrs. Stanley should have to explain all this, if there was not been more to explain. I allow, therefore, that the thought that there was something to explain about the unoccupied bedroom was, momentarily present in my mind. The second thing that may have borne me some of my dreams was this. At dinner, the conversation turned for a moment on ghosts, and Ingalls, with the certainty of conviction, expressed his belief that anybody who could possibly believe in the existence of the supernatural phenomenon was unworthy of the name of an ass. The subject immediately dropped, and as far as I could recollect, nothing else occurred or was said that could bear any witness to what follows. We all went upstairs rather early, and personally, I yawned my way up the stairs, feeling hideously sleepy. My room was rather hot, and I threw open all the windows, and from there the white light of the moon poured in, and the love songs of many nightingales. I undressed quickly and got into bed, but although I have felt so sleepy before, I now felt extremely wide awake. But I was quite content to be awake. I didn't toss and turn, and I felt perfectly happy listening to the song and seeing the light. Then, it is possible I may have gone to sleep, and what follows may have been a dream. I thought anyhow that after a time the nightingale ceased singing and the moon sank. I thought about it, and for some unexplained reason, I was going to lie awake all night, and I might as well read. And I remembered that I had left a book in which I was very interested in the dining room on the first floor. So I got out of bed, I lit a candle, and went downstairs. I went into the room and saw on the side table the book that I had been looking for, and then, simultaneously, from the corner of my eye, saw that the door into the unoccupied room was open. A curious gray light, not of dawn or of moonshine, came from it, and I looked in. The bed stood just opposite the door, a big four-poster, hung with tapestry at the head. But then I saw the grayish light of the bedroom. It came from the bed, or rather, what was on the bed. For it was covered with great caterpillars, a foot or more in length, and which crawled all over it. They were faintly luminous, and it was the light of which that shone in the room. And instead of the sucker feet of ordinary caterpillars, they had these rows of pincers, like crabs. And they had moved by grasping what they lay on their pincers and then sliding their bodies forward. In color, these dreadful insects were yellowish-gray, and they were covered with irregular lumps and swellings. There may have been hundreds of them, but first they formed some sort of a wriggling, crawling pyramid on the bed. Occasionally one fell off into the floor with a soft, fleshy thud, and though the floor was hard concrete, it yielded to this little pincer feet as if it had been putty, and crawling back, the caterpillar would mount up on the bed again to rejoin its fearful companions. They appeared to have no faces, so to speak, but at one end of them there was this mouth that opened sideways in respiration. Then, as I looked, it seemed to me that as if they had suddenly become conscious of my presence. All the mouths at that rate turned in my direction, and the next moment they began dropping off the bed, those soft, fleshy thuds on the floor, and wriggling towards me. For 1 second a paralysis as if in a dream was on me, but the next I was running up the stairs again to my room, and I remember feeling that I could feel the marble steps on my bare feet. I rushed into my bedroom and slammed the door behind me, and then I was certainly awake now. I found myself standing by my bed with the sweat of terror pouring over me. The noises of the banging of the door still rang in my ears, but as would have been more unusual if things were merely a nightmare. The terror that had been mine when I saw those fearful beasts crawling about the bed or dropping softly on the floor did not cease then. Awake now, if dreaming before, I did not at all recover from the horror of the dream. It did not seem to me that I had dreamed at all, and until dawn I sat or stood, not daring to lie down, thinking that every rustle or movement that I had heard was the approaching of the caterpillars. To them, the claws that bit into the cement of the wood of this door was child's play. Steel would not keep these things out. But with the sweet and noble return of day, the horror vanished. The whispers of the wind became benign again. The nameless fear, whatever it was smoothed out and terrified me no longer. Dawn broke, hueless at first, and then it grew dove-colored. Then the flaming pageant of light spread over the sky. The admirable rule of the house was that everybody had breakfast where and when they pleased, and in consequence it was not until lunchtime that I met any other members of the house, since I had breakfast in my balcony and wrote letters and other things until lunch. In fact, I'd gotten down to the meal rather late, and after all the others threes had begun, between my knife and fork there was a small pill-box of cardboard that I had, looked down at Ingalls and spoke. "Do look at that," he said. "Since you are interested in natural history, I found it crawling in my counterspace last night. I still don't know what to do with it." I think that before I opened the pill-box I expected something of the sort of which that I found it in. Inside it, anyhow, was a small caterpillar, grayish-yellow in color, with curious bumps and excursions on its rings. It was extremely active, and hurried about in the box, this way and that. Its feet were unlike the feet of any caterpillars I had ever saw before, but they were like the pincers of crabs. I looked and shut the lid down again. "No, I don't know it," I said, "but it looks rather unwholesome. What are you going to do with it?" "Oh, I shall keep it," said Ingalls. "It has begun to spin. I want to see what sort of moth it turns into." I opened the box again and saw that these hurrying movements were indeed the beginnings of spinning a web of cocoon. Then Ingalls spoke again. It's got those funny feet, too. They're like crab pincers. The Latin for crab. What was it again? Right, cancer. So, in this case, I shall call it, Cancer Ingalnis. Yeah, that's a good name. And then something happened. Some momentary piecing together of all that I had seen or dreamed. Something in his words just seemed to me to throw light onto it all. My own intense horror at the experience of which the night before linked itself to what is now before me. In effect, I took the box and threw it, caterpillar and all, out the window. There was a gravel path just outside, and beyond it a fountain playing into a basin. The box fell in the middle of the basin. Ingalls laughed. "So the student of the occult doesn't like solid facts," he said. My poor caterpillar!" The talk went off again onto other subjects, and I have only given in detail, as they happened, these trivials between in order to assure myself that I have recorded everything that should have been born of the occult subjects and the subjects of caterpillars. But at that moment, when I threw that pill-box from the fountain, I lost my head. My only excuse is that, as is probably plain, the tenant of it was, in miniature, exactly what I had been crowded onto the bed of the unoccupied room. And though this translation of this phantom into flesh and blood, or whatever it is that these caterpillars are made of, ought to perhaps to have, been reveled in horror at the night, as a matter of fact, it did nothing of the kind, It only made the crawling pyramid that covered the bed in the unoccupied room just more hideously real. After lunch, we spent a lazy hour or two strolling about the garden or sitting in the loggia, and it must have been at least 4 o'clock when Stanley and I started off to bathe. Down in the path that I had led to the fountain in which I had thrown the pillbox, the water was shallow and clear, and at the bottom which I saw its white remains. The water had disintegrated the cardboard, and it had come no more than a few strips of shredded sodden paper. The center of the fountain was marble, an Italian Cupid, which had been squirting the water out of a wineskin held into its arm, and crawling up its leg was the caterpillar. Strange and scaredly credible as it seemed, it must have survived the falling into bits to its prison, and made its way into the shore. And there it was, out of arm's reach, weaving and waving this way and that as it evolved into its cocoon. Then, as I looked to it, it seemed to me like the caterpillars that I had seen last night, it saw me. And breaking out of the threads that surrounded it, it crawled down the marble leg of the Cupid and began swimming like a snake across the water of the fountain towards me. It came with extraordinary speed. The fact of a caterpillar being able to swim was new to me. In another moment was crawling up the marble lip of the basement, and then Ingle joined us. Why, if it isn't old Cancer Ingleness! Again, oh, he said, catching sight of the beast. What a teasing hurry it's in. We were standing side by side on the path, and when the caterpillar had advanced to within about a yard of us, it stopped, began waving again, as if it had doubts in where directions it would go. Then it appeared to make up its mind and crawled onto Ingle's shoe. It likes me best, he said, but I don't really know if I like it all that much. And it won't drown if I thought perhaps he shook it off his shoe and onto the gravel path and trotted on it. All afternoon the air got heavier and heavier, and that was without a doubt coming up from the south. And that night again, I went up to bed feeling very sleepy. But below my drowsiness, so to speak, there was this consciousness, stronger than before. There had been something wrong with this house. That something dangerous was close at hand. But I fell asleep at once, and how long after I do not know. Either I woke or dreamed. I woke feeling that I must get up at once, or I shouldn't be too late. But for what? Then, dreaming or awake, I lay and fought this fear, telling myself that I was but the prey of my own nerves and disorders, or what not, and at the same time, not quite clearly knowing, in another part of my mind, so to speak, that every moment's delay added to the danger. At least this second feeling became irresistible. And I put on my coat and trousers and went out of my room and onto the landing. And then I saw that I had already delayed too long, and it was now too late. The whole of the landing, the first floor below me, was invisible under the swarm of caterpillars that crawled there. The folding doors into the sitting room, for which opened the bedroom where I had once slept the night, were shut. But they were squeezing through the cracks of it, dropping one by one through the keyhole, elongating themselves into mere strings as they passed, and growing fat and lumpy, and again on emerging. Some, as if exploring, were nosing about the steps into the passage at the end of where Ingle's room. Others were crawling onto the lower steps of the staircase that led up to where I once stood. The landing, however, was completely covered with them. I was cut off. The frozen horror that seized me was what I saw. I can give no idea in words. Then, at least a general movement began to take place, and they grew thicker, and the steps that led to Ingle's room gradually, like some kind of hideous tide of flesh, they advanced along the passage, and I saw the foremost viable only a pale gray luminescence that came from them, reached his door. Again and again I tried to shout and warn him. In terror all this time they had run. They had, at the sound of my voice, at any moment could stir instead, but for all my efforts I felt that no sound came from my throat. They crawled along the hinge cracks of his door, passing through as they had done before, and still I stood there, making impotent efforts to shout for him, to bid him to escape, while There was just no time. At last the passage was completely empty. They had all gone, and at that moment I was conscious for the first time of that cold marble landing for which I had stood barefoot. The dawn was just beginning to break in the eastern sky. 6 months later, I met Mrs. Stanley in a courtroom in the House of England. We talked on many subjects, and at least she said, "I don't think I've seen you since I'd got the dreadful news about Arthur Ingalls a month ago." "I haven't heard," said I. "No? He's gotten cancer. You don't have any advice on operation. There's no hope for a cure. He's riddled with it, the doctors say." Now, during all these 6 months, I do not think a day has passed in which I had not in my mind had dreamt, or whatever you'd like to call him, which I had seen in the Villa Cascana. "It's awful, is it not?" she continued. "And I feel, I can't help feeling that he may have—" "Caught it in the villa?" I asked. She looked at me with a blank surprise. "Why'd you say that?" she asked. "How did you know?" And then she told me. In the unoccupied bedroom before, there was a fatal case of cancer. She had, of course, taken the best advice and had been told that the utmost dictates of prudence would be obeyed so long as she did not put anybody to sleep in that room, which had been so thoroughly disinfected with newly whitewashed and painted. And that was the first installment of Scary Stories for October. This was my first time narrating a story, so I apologize if it may have seemed a bit rushed or nervous, or I may have skipped a bit. But I'm hoping to do better, and I'm hoping to improve with each story, or at least make a better effort to get everything out there. But let me know what you think. You're the best, you're the best, you're the best. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a like. And if you want to see more of these, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Still working on those outros. These are a little off the cuff.